The Bound series by Donatello's Girl 36. I will be reading the T-rated versions. If you wish to read the M-rated versions, you may go to archiveofourown.org. Disclaimer: I do not own the original characters of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Only the original characters appearing in this series belong to me. There is no profit made from the written version of the fan fiction or the reading of the fan fiction. Volume 1, Number 1. Title: Bound. Summary: The arrival of a long-lost friend brings back memories and emotions for the Turtles, especially Donnie. Lives and futures hang in the balance. Chapter 1. Remember Me. The Mummy movie marathon had only just started, even though it was late already. The four turtles were slouched about the living room, unwinding after a hard day of training, when Donatello felt something stir inside him. It was a long-forgotten sensation that drew out a distant memory and a face that made his heart break all over again. Long dark hair and big brown eyes that seemed to see deep into your soul without even trying. It had been Splinter that had found her crying, frightened and alone in the sewer tunnel while on his daily scavenge for food. He might have left her there, except she had been a mere child of 10, the same age as his own sons. The smell of blood had been nearly overwhelming. "Are you all right, child? Are you lost?" Splinter had recanted the tale of how she had tried to hide from him behind a pile of trash, without even looking in his direction, and when she had finally dared to glance up at him, it had been more awe than fear upon seeing the 5-foot rat. She had visibly relaxed, and Splinter had been able to coax her home with him. There they had all learned that she was hiding from an evil crime boss named Shinju, that had murdered her family after they had refused to pay protection money to keep their small grocery store open. Those big brown eyes had seen everything and were haunted by the memory. Splinter had took pity on the child and allowed her to stay with them for a short time. But in that time she had influenced them all, and in particular Donnie. They had created a bond of sorts, and they had become nearly inseparable. Wherever one was, the other was sure to be too. This had begun to concern Splinter, for the young girl did not belong below, and he feared the strong attachment might end up hurting Donatello in the long run, especially if the girl decided to leave and his son would not be able to follow her. So it had been with a heavy heart that Splinter had contacted an old friend above, who had met them and taken her to the protective custody of the NYPD. Donnie winced as the memory of that day echoed in his mind. Tears had fell like rain from those big brown eyes as the man had scooped her up to take her away. Donatello, too, had to be carried away by Splinter as he fought his father, crying out to his friend. Donnie recalled not speaking to his father for over a week, which at that young of an age felt like years. It had been his brothers that had comforted him then, they too feeling the great loss. Donnie had never forgotten the betrayal, though with time he had forgiven Splinter. Life has a way of healing you, even when you don't want it to. But now, inside him, he could feel that pull again, that feeling that had left such a gaping hole inside him. It was like a magnet, and his body reacted to it like a homing beacon. Before he could even really process what was happening, he had leapt up and made a run for the door. "Donnie?" Leo called after him. "What's up with that dude?" Mikey muttered with a mouth full of pizza. "Hey, when you gotta go, Raph chimed in. Leo's eyes narrowed, his intuition telling him there was something wrong. "I think it's more than that. We better follow him. There could be trouble." Mikey gave a begrudging grunt to the mummy that was already chasing people around on screen, and followed his brothers as they gave chase. Donnie was sprinting along the tunnels, using only his instincts to drive him. Finally he rounded a corner and slid to a stop. A few yards away stood 3 men and a small woman with long dark hair. "We should kill her now before she can bolt again and go blabbing to the cops," one of the men said as he shoved the woman to the ground. She lifted her face off the tunnel floor slightly, and her eyes shifted to where Donnie stood. There was no way she could actually see him in the darkness, yet somehow she knew he was there. Behind Donnie, the other 3 turtles crept up to see what was going on. They didn't understand. They didn't get it. They didn't know who it was. Her name slipped from his lips, expelling with it awe, relief, and anger all at once. Sarah. The men looked up at the soft noise, but did not have time to react as Donatello crashed into them, disarming them and knocking them out in less than 30 seconds. The turtle turned to look down at the young woman. Those big brown eyes shimmered in the darkness. "Donnie, are you all right?" he queried as he offered her his hand. She took it gratefully, and in one swift movement she wrapped her arms around him and buried her face in his neck. "I am now." Donnie couldn't resist letting his weapon fall to the ground as his arms wrapped around her just as tightly. The other turtles approached, still a bit confused. "Donnie, what the heck is going on?" Raph exclaimed, bewildered. "Did you say Sarah?" Leo's eyes widened in recognition of the name. They all gasped as she turned to face them. "Dudette, it's you!" Mikey wrapped her in a bear hug just as she stepped from the protective arms of Donatello. The youngest turtle recalled how tender Sarah had been when they were so little. Even at the age of 10 she had helped taking care of each of them with patience and kindness. He remembered how he had fallen off his skateboard and sliced his leg open pretty bad. Splinter had been away gathering food for his family, and so Sarah had gently cleaned the wound and wrapped it in a clean bandage, ever so aware of how painful it was. Splinter had looked her work over when he had returned, and determined she had done so great a job that it needed no more attention. Sarah released Mikey and turned to hug Leo, who was still in a slight state of disbelief. He too remembered all she had once meant to him. He recalled how she had helped him in his studies. She had as sharp a mind as Donnie, but had a lot more patience. Donnie tended to get frustrated with his brothers if they didn't get something the very first time he tried to explain it to them. Sarah, on the other hand, had broken things down into its simplest form and worked up from there. She had been one of the reasons he had learned to love history and art. Now Sarah turned to Raph, who was blinking furiously. "I've missed you all," she said softly as she hugged his neck. Raph shuddered, returning inside to a small boy who had just been chastised by his father for not contributing to the chores. Splinter would never have known that he had skipped out on his chores that day if it hadn't been for Leo informing him. Raph had slipped away to complete a present he was making for his brother on his upcoming birthday. Sarah had guessed what he was up to and had actually taken over Raph's share of the chores. But Leo had been irritated by his brother's disappearance, and so had informed Splinter as soon as he had returned home. Raph had received a good lecture for the whole affair. Sarah had found him later outside the lair, his head tucked in his knees. She had simply sat down beside him and put an arm over his shoulders, not saying a word. But the simple physical contact, along with her silent understanding, had been enough. Raph blinked again as he fought back the lump in his throat. He pushed back to look at her. "Where have you been?" Sarah was interrupted by a groan nearby, which drew their attention back to the present. "Who are these guys, and what did they want with you?" Leo asked as he moved past Donnie towards the 3 figures laying in a heap. "They are Shinju's men. After I was—" She paused, trying to think of the best word. "Taken away, the FBI placed me in the Witness Protection Program and took me to the West Coast. I've lived in Oregon for the past 10 years, until they found me. They brought me back here to New York, and when I saw my chance to escape, I did." "Looks like they caught up with you." Mikey narrowed his eyes at the unconscious bodies. They had nearly hurt his sis, and that was not cool. Donnie had moved back to Sarah's side. He squeezed her hand reassuringly. No one will ever hurt you again, I swear it." His chest swelled as she smiled at him. That pull inside him felt like it would rip him apart. "Never again will we be separated," he swore silently to himself. Splinter would simply just have to accept it, and if he didn't, well, Donnie was more than capable of taking care of himself and Sarah. The Turtles decided to tie the thugs up and leave them as a present in front of the local police station. Their illegal guns would be enough to get them locked up for a while. Now they were headed back to the lair. Donnie could feel Sarah's hesitation, and he finally stopped to look at her. She seemed worried. "What is it?" She glanced up from her internal musings. She could never hide anything from Donnie. Somehow he always knew if something was bothering her. "Well, what if Splinter—" She couldn't finish the thought. It caught in her throat like a ball of knives. "That was a long time ago, Dudette. I'm sure Splinter won't try to send you away again," Mikey reassured her. "But what if I do something that makes him mad at me again?" "That was never your fault, Sarah," Leo protested. "That was Splinter's decision." "Yeah, the wrong one," Raph snorted. He too had suffered from the girls being suddenly ripped from their lives. However, unlike Donnie's very loud objections, he had suffered silently, growing resentful. "Don't worry, that won't happen again." Donnie's eyes flared with determination and a hint of anger, then softened as he looked down at her. "I won't let it, I promise." Sarah set her jaw and nodded firmly. They could handle whatever was to come together. It wasn't long before they reached the entrance to the lair. In spite of herself, Sarah paused. Donnie took her hand, and Raph placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Sarah realized what a great feeling it was to be home with the only family she had left, and with that she crossed the threshold into the lair.